Hey watch friends, today we're going to be checking out the latest prototype offering from the RZE sister brand, HVD. This is the Spectre Diver Chronograph. This one's going to be launching on Kickstarter on March 21st of 2024, and I'll of course have a link down the video description. Just like with the prior model, this one is going to be leaning heavily into that vintage styling. However, they didn't just add a chronograph, they do feature some updates that we'll talk about as we go throughout. As far as the basic specs, this comes standard with a 1-year warranty. On calipers measured roughly from the 3 o'clock to 9 o'clock position, this one is smaller than the predecessor, coming in at 39.3 millimeters. The bezel kicks out and is coming in at 40.1 millimeters, so you can see that little overhang there. The lugs are a strap change friendly 20 millimeters. The lug to lug is coming in at 47.1 millimeters. The total thickness, I'm getting thicker than their stated specs, and inclusive of this crystal, it's coming in at 15.1 millimeters on my calipers. So definitely not the thinnest in the world, but we'll look at that further. As far as the crystal itself, part of what gives this vintage styling is it actually features a domed plexiglass crystal, and you can see that really adds a nice distortive effect, and it gives a warmth that only plexiglass can achieve. Of course, that comes with the trade-offs. It is going to be easier to scratch than sapphire, but of course it's easier to maintain as well if you should get scratches or scuffs. As far as the movement, this is beating away with an ST1901. For those who aren't familiar with it, it is a manual wind movement. It does not have hacking, however I don't think that's as big of a deal with this being a chronograph, but additionally though with having a small second at the 9 o'clock position. The power reserve is going to be roughly 50 hours. The water resistance, similarly, is going to be 50 meters or 5 atmospheres. While that's definitely not the highest in the world, I think with being the vintage styling in a chronograph, it's not entirely unexpected. As far as the weight, size to my 6.5-inch wrist, this is coming in at 137.2 grams. So now that we have all that out of the way, let's go ahead and delve deeper and really get a feel for what this is like to live with. As far as the colors, this is only going to be available standard in 2 different color options. You have the black that we're looking at today, but then additionally there is a panda version, which is going to be white with black accents. There's also a blue that might be unlocked as part of the Kickstarter campaign. As far as this dial, this is actually a heat enamel dial. And what's so nice about that as opposed to the traditional cold application that many companies are using, I should say the cold application, this traditional heat applied here, it really achieves a beautiful depth and kind of inky blackness to that. So you get a great gloss and overall effect. As far as the dial layout, you're going to see printing at the 12 o'clock position with the brand name, and then at the 6 o'clock position you have the model name. As you move out, you can see there is a nice gilt application of having that chapter ring there. And then of course you do have the 2 sub-dials laid in at the 3 o'clock and 9 o'clock position. At the 3 o'clock position, you're going to have your minutes for your chronograph function, and then at the 9 o'clock position, you're going to have your running seconds. Overall, for the sub-dials, you're also going to notice that they do have a nice railroad track effect there, which I think really plays well with the overall gloss of the dial to add some contrast and visual play. It does really hit, especially as far as the way the light is hitting it, will give some different effects there, and I like that. As far as the hardware, the handset on this, so first you're going to have your primary minute and hour, and then as we already talked about, you're going to have the small second at the 9 o'clock position. The primary second hand that you have is going to be for the chronograph function, and we'll check that out, start it up as we go throughout. As far as the hand construction, this is what I would describe as being kind of like a modified Dauphine. So it has blunted tips for that. It does have the traditional crease down the middle as well as the faceting and light play. That's going to be a full polish for it, and as you can see, it does have a nice application of gilt on this, and that's going to be true of all of the hardware, so your handset as well as your markers that we'll look at here momentarily. As far as the loom application that we'll check out here momentarily, you can see that this does have a vintage coloration, which again is in keeping with the overall style as far as that vintage theming for this particular one. As far as the second hand, you can see it's just a nice delicate second hand there, so you have just little embellishments to really draw your attention to it while keeping it nice and clean and simple. As far as the markers themselves, you can see that there is a trapezoid at the 12 o'clock as well as 6 o'clock position, and the rest of them are just going to be a traditional round, again, with a nice application of polish. As far as the loom, you can see that there is a strong application of loom that's applied all the way around, so despite the fact that it has the vintage look, you still do get great performance for this. So I found this to endure overall well as perform well with initial charging, as you can see here. Shifting over, you can see that this does play well with the light. So as you go through changing light conditions, you can see nice interplay there with a combination of the gloss as well as that loom peeking through. As far as the bezel, this particular one is going to be a 60 60 click bi-directional bezel, and we'll check out that action here momentarily. The layout is a 12-hour configuration, hence the bi-directional to be able to dial that in. As far as the insert, this is an aluminum insert, which has kind of a matte application or finish, which really contrasts nicely with that gilt. So you get that shining gold effect there, which is a cool touch, and really, again, leans into that vintage look. You're going to alternate, so you have a pip at the 12 o'clock position, and that does have a traditional vial style insert in that, which is a really cool touch. Additionally, then you're going to alternate with your hashes as well as your numerals going around through there. The bezel itself is, as we already looked at, does have an overhang, so it does protrude past the case, which really makes that easy to grip a hold of, as we'll see here momentarily. And it does have a wide coin edge as far as the application there. Listening to that action, you can hear it's a medium. It gives nice tactile click, no real complaints there. I think for a bi-directional bezel, it's really dialed in well. Very, very little, if any, play whatsoever. You can feel just the slightest movement, but nothing that I would call play. I think that's extremely well dialed in for that, and I think they picked the weighting well for the style. Unlikely that you're going to bump that loose, but at the same time, very easy to manipulate, and it definitely gives you that tactile feedback. As far as the case on this, as well as the rest of the construction, is going to be 316L stainless steel, so fairly common there. As we already looked at, it is definitely on the thicker side, so you're going to see it is somewhat of a modified kind of slab construction there, so it does have a subtle sort of downturn, but as you look across there, you can see it's almost flat. What they did, though, is you have the horizontal brushing that runs the length of the case, but then you have an undercut here with that polish application. What that does is, as you can see, that's kind of like an elliptical there where that does come up thicker at the middle and then tapers out. What that does is that visually makes it seem like it has a more pronounced downturn than it actually does. If you actually look at that and try to put aside that, you can see it's relatively flat. And unfortunately, as a result, that does mean with this thicker case back here, as we'll talk about later on, it does sit a little bit proud, and we'll see that in the wrist footage as well. As far as the overall case construction, you can see as you move out to the edges there, you do have drilled lug holes, so that makes it easier for your strap changes. The lugs themselves, you can see, have a nice taper. So this is one of the things that changed from the predecessor. These are going to be a lot more delicate, so you can see it still has a chunkiness to it, but the way that they flow down, it comes with a little more of an aggressive taper, and especially with that kind of polished chamfer cutting in. But additionally, though, in between the lugs, as opposed to the prior Spectre Diver where it was flat, this actually does curve to the case, which I personally think is a much nicer look. So while it might not be as fitting for traditional straps, if you don't go with curved ends there, I do think it's a better look overall, and I think it looks more cleanly integrated. As far as the crown side you can see here does not have any crown guards, as you'd expect with a chronograph style. The crown itself is coming in at 7.4 millimeters, easy to grip a hold of. Consistent with the manual wind construction, this is going to be a push-pull, and let's go ahead and listen to that. Give a nice tactile click from that ST1901. As far as the construction here, you can see that this, again, does have kind of like a gear or coin edge cut out for that as well. The crown itself is polished and signed on the outside. As far as the pushers, it has two pushers at your 2 o'clock and 4 o'clock position. They're measuring in at 4.3 millimeters, and they both are polished for that as well. Let's go ahead and give that a push. We can hear that nice click. And then let's bring it back. All right, so with all of that, let's go ahead and flip over and take a look at the case back. The case back on this one is an exhibition window. As you can see, it's rather expansive in size, and it really showcases that movement. One of the things that the ST1901 is known for is really being an absolutely gorgeous movement, especially at the price point that this comes in at, that we'll talk about here momentarily. The case back itself is a screw-in construction. As far as the movement, you can see it has a variety of things, everywhere from the blued hardware to seeing the Geneva striping, the gold accent, really ties in nicely, and it's very attractive to look at, as well as those jewels there. So very nice, and this is always definitely a showstopper, especially, again, at a relatively entry level as far as pricing. And then with being a manual wind, you do not have any rotor to cover any of that up, so you can take in all of that goodness. Really a good use of an exhibition window. I think this is one that deserves to be showed off. As far as the bracelet on this is going to be 4 millimeter taper, so it's 20 millimeters at the lugs and then tapers down to 16 millimeters at the clasp. As far as the end link, this has a female end link. It is a 3-link construction, which is going to be principally brushing running down the length of the bracelet. However, it does have some nice kind of cutout in appearance, milled down in polished accents on the edge, which gives a really cool effect for that, almost like a riveted style. So really slick there. The bracelet links in modern styling are going to be held in with screws. So I would recommend, if you don't already have one, picking up a good quality screwdriver. I'll of course have a link down to one I'd recommend in the video description. This does not feature quick release spring bars on the back of this. However, with having those drilled lugs, it's still going to be easy enough to change straps around. As far as the clasp itself, this is a basic double pusher kind of construction. You again carry through with the brushing, but it does have polished accents on the outside. And then of course the signature pressed in the middle there. As you open that up, you're going to see a milled bridge. On the outside, it does have 3 traditional micro adjust holes, and we'll come back to that. Alright, so now that we have all that out of the way, let's go ahead and bring in a few different comps before we wrap things up with my view of the positives, critiques, as well as summary. First, let's go ahead and bring in another one from RZE. This is one of their original. This is the RZE Resolute, and you can get an idea here as far as sizing, 40 millimeters, a little more angular for the construction as to how those fit into each other, or with each other rather. Here it is next to the Dorenzo. This is the Solaris, the DRZ05. Let's get rid of that dust there. And you can just see, very different styling here, but wanted to check out another black application. You can just see how much of a depth and inkiness that enamel achieves. Next up, let's go ahead and check out next to another chronograph. This is the Le Sablier Chronosport. Very different unconventional styling here, but this gives you an idea. They are relatively similar in terms of sizing, though I do think that Le Sablier, definitely with its angular features and extended lugs out, does have a little more presence overall, but that gives you an idea there as far as sizing. And then finally, just wanted to bring it in next to a traditional 40 millimeter watch to give you an idea, and then additionally with a bezel here. This is a Zelos Mako, and this is customized with stainless steel bezel on this one. But it gives you an idea there as far as how that stacks up sizing-wise. Alright, so now that we have all of that, let's go ahead and wrap things up. First, for my view of the positives, this overall, I think they nailed the vintage theming for this. Between the black, that depth that you get in the black enamel, that's really accentuated by those gilt accents. The gilt, I think, is excellently done. Across the board, I think that they well achieved with everything from the chapter ring and having those hashes. That has a nice vibrancy to it. The same thing with the markers, the interplay, the full dynamic. It's just a very classic traditional look. And that truly is accentuated by that crystal as well. As we already talked about, you're going to get that additive warmth that you already have with gilt, but that you also get from plexiglass. So putting the two together, and it just really is a watch that you have to see in person across lighting to be able to fully appreciate how much pop this truly has, especially for a relatively subdued look. As we've already talked about ad nauseum here, that dial with having the heat enamel application of the dial, it really just achieves that inky blackness. It looks like that dark pull across the dial, which allows that gilt to pop so well. Really like that as well. And then, as we already talked about as well, the ST1901 movement, I mean, it's gorgeous. No one can argue with that as far as the overall attractiveness of the movement, especially at the price point, because this is only coming in at $399, which really isn't too bad at all for what you're getting with having the heat enamel, those kind of things as well. But we'll talk about some critiques as well for the trade-off. There are some things I would like to see added that I think could be achieved at this price point. So with that, let's go ahead and actually talk about the critiques. First is, as I already alluded to previously, with having this pronounced case back like it does in a relatively flat case, I do think you get a bit of that kind of flying saucer effect. So it wears a little bit thick and a little bit proud from the wrist. That's something I would have loved to have seen that tucked in or some way just for this to visually be, to nest a little bit better in the wrist and be a little more slim there. As far as the end link, part of the symptom, as you can see again, with relatively chunky at the lugs, that means that the bracelet sits rather high here. As you can see, that results in where you have kind of that end link, with the female end link here, you get that end link drop. So as it goes to the first link, you can see you get kind of a ledge here and a ledge here, which I'm generally not crazy about. That's one of the things I like, where there's a little more downturn, a little more kind of taper to that, where I think female end links work a little better. That's something that's always a bit of a pet peeve for me, and that's no exception here. And then finally, one of the things that I would have liked to have seen them do is to fully modernize this and get away from the traditional micro and go with a toolless micro adjust clasp. I think that definitely, especially at the $400 price point, I think you're getting into the territory where that's becoming somewhat standard to have that available. Sure, it's not across the board, and it might have added a couple bucks to it, but I think it would have been worth the trade-off for most people. So where does that leave us? Ultimately, if you're in the market for a vintage style watch, I think that this is a refreshing and fun way to get that vintage feel while still having mostly modern touches. So I really don't think you can go wrong. And of course, it's backed by the RZE founders there, so you know that they're likely going to deliver, and you should be in good hands. So with that being said, I hope this video has been helpful for you. If you did like it, please do tap that like button. As always, if you haven't already done so, smash that subscribe button. Drop me a comment. Let me know what you think of these two. Which do you like? Are you hoping they unlock that blue stretch goal? All that kind of good stuff. Thanks for watching.